When I first saw it, sunlight broke through the cracks of a rusted gate, illuminating the house that was supposed to be mine, but the HOA had already put their sign on it. It was early morning. The kind of morning that smells like fresh cut grass and dust. I stood there, at the edge of Crestfield Estates, staring at an old mansion that looked like it was holding its breath. Broken windows, ivy crawling up the stone walls, and a wooden gate that leaned forward like it was tired of guarding secrets. This was my grandfather's house. Or at least, it used to be. He built it long before the HOA existed. Long before the neighborhood even had paved roads. But after he passed, the property went silent. Taxes were paid, the land registered, but no one had stepped foot here for years. Until me. I had come back to restore what was ours. When I walked up the gravel path, sunlight spilled through the trees, catching on a metal sign nailed to the gate. Property of Crestfield HOA, no trespassing. I froze. The words hit harder than the morning chill. I pulled the sign off, it snapped free with a loud clang. "Hey!" A sharp voice echoed. A woman in sunglasses and a cream suit marched toward me, clipboard in hand. HOA badge. President. "You can't remove HOA property," she barked. I held up the sign. "This isn't your property." She smirked. "According to our records, it's community-owned now. You'll need board approval to enter." I laughed, bitter, confused. "My name's on the deed." She crossed her arms. "Then you better prove it." That morning, sunlight hit the mansion's cracked windows, scattering light across the yard like shards of glass. And something in me snapped, quiet, but deep. They thought they could erase my family's name like it was paint peeling off a wall. Not this time. I walked inside the mansion anyway, floorboards creaked under years of silence. Dust floated in the sunlight like old memories refusing to die. On the fireplace mantel lay an old photograph, my grandfather standing beside this very gate, smiling. Below it, a brass key. And carved into the frame, almost invisible under the grime, 3 words. "Don't let go." I didn't know it yet, but that message would be the reason the HOA would regret ever touching this house. The next morning, sunlight poured through the cracked windows like it was trying to wake the house up. Dust swirled in golden streaks as I stood in the front hall, holding the brass key I'd found. It felt heavy, not just metal heavy, but history heavy. Every corner of the house smelled like old wood and quiet betrayal. The HOA woman's words kept echoing in my head. "According to our records, it's community-owned now." Records. That word bothered me. So after a quick shower at the motel down the road, I drove to the county records office. Morning traffic was soft, the sunlight bouncing off windshields. Everything looked calm, but inside, I was burning. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I asked for property records for Crestfield Lot 9, Old Heritage Estate. She typed, frowned, then said. Says here. HOA ownership transfer, filed 6 years ago. My hands tightened on the counter. Filed by who? She scrolled. Crestfield Homeowners Association. Signed by Margaret Delane, the president. Of course. But that's not possible, I said. The deed's in my grandfather's name. It should have transferred to my father, and now to me. She shrugged. You can request copies, but you'll need a legal challenge if it's disputed. When she printed the document, the paper trembled slightly in my hand. There it was, forged signatures, fake notary stamp, and an HOA approval form claiming the mansion had been abandoned community property. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft, dressed up in legal ink. Outside, sunlight hit my face, too bright for how dark I felt inside. I sat on the courthouse steps, staring at the paper. People walked by, laughing, talking, living, but my world had stopped right there on that line that said ownership transferred. That evening, I drove back to Crestfield. The HOA office was near the main gate, glass walls, trimmed hedges, perfect parking lines. Too perfect. Margaret's car was there, silver and smug. I waited in the truck, watching her through the window as she talked to two board members. They were laughing. Maybe about me. Maybe about my grandfather's house they'd stolen and labeled as a project. When they left, I walked up to the glass door. Inside, behind the counter, was a framed mission statement. Preserving our community's image since 1987. I almost laughed. On the bulletin board, pinned neatly, was a redevelopment plan, Phase 3, Heritage Park expansion. And right there in the outline, Lot 9 was marked. To be cleared for community garden and event plaza. They weren't just stealing the land. They were planning to erase every trace of my family's home. I took out my phone and started snapping photos, the board, the map, the signatures. Every detail. I didn't know how yet, but I'd make them pay for every brick they touched. The next morning, I returned to the mansion. The sunlight hit the porch like a spotlight. The same sign I tore off yesterday was back, cleaner, newer. They had nailed another one. But this time, I smiled. Because now I had proof, and a plan. I set my coffee cup down on the steps, looked up at the broken windows, and whispered to the empty house. They think this place is abandoned. Then I turned toward the road, voice hardening. Let's remind them who it belongs to. The sunlight glinted off the brass key in my hand, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, tiny numbers etched along the side. Coordinates. My grandfather had left more than a message. He'd left a clue. Morning sunlight sliced through the old curtains, scattering light across the dusty hallway like shards of truth trying to break free. I sat at the kitchen table, the brass key turning slowly between my fingers. The faintly engraved numbers on its side had been haunting me all night, 43.9127, minus 112.0673. Coordinates. I typed them into my phone. The map zoomed in just a few blocks away, to the back edge of my own property. It led to the overgrown garden behind the mansion, the one fenced off long ago, where ivy swallowed everything in silence. So as the sun climbed higher, I walked out through the broken back door. The ground was damp with dew, and the air smelled like earth and memory. Birds sang somewhere distant, too innocent for the weight I carried. The coordinates led me to a patch of cracked stone half buried under weeds. When I knelt, brushing the moss aside, I saw a small iron lock plate built into the ground, the exact shape of my grandfather's key. I hesitated, my heart thudding. Then I slid the key in and turned. A faint click. The stone shifted. Beneath it, hidden under a shallow pit of dirt and metal framing, was a small wooden box wrapped in plastic. The seal had kept it dry, even after years of neglect. I lifted it carefully, it was heavier than it looked. Inside, a bundle of old papers, brittle but intact, tied with twine. And on top, a note written in my grandfather's firm, slanted handwriting. If you're reading this, it means they came for it. Don't let them win. My throat tightened. I carried the box inside and set it on the dining table, where sunlight made the dust shimmer around it like gold dust. Inside the papers were original ownership deeds, tax receipts, and even photos of the property being built, proof that it had been a private residence since 1958. But the last page was the most important. A notarized letter from a county officer, confirming the property was never legally transferred and remained under the Harris Family Estate Trust. My family's trust. It was everything I needed. Just then, the sound of tires crunched outside. I peeked through the cracked blinds. A white SUV pulled up, HOA logo on the side. Margaret stepped out, heels clicking against the gravel, another board member behind her. They were early. Too early. I hid the box under a loose floorboard and opened the door. "Morning," she said with that polished smile that never reached her eyes. "We received reports of trespassing. Still you, I assume. I folded my arms. Still me. The owner. Her smile flickered. That's still under review. Not for long, I said. She scanned the porch, eyes narrowing at the fresh footprints in the garden. You've been digging. Just cleaning up what you people left to rot. Her tone sharpened. You're not allowed to alter HOA property without permission. I stepped closer, sunlight catching the edge of my anger. Funny. Because last I checked, HOA property doesn't come with my grandfather's name carved into the foundation. She went silent. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression, doubt. Maybe even fear. When they left, I watched their SUV disappear down the street, tires spitting gravel like they couldn't drive away fast enough. Then I knelt by the floorboard, lifted it, and stared at the box again. The proof was there. The past was there. And now, so was the fight. The mansion wasn't abandoned anymore. As the sunlight spread across the floor, I whispered to the quiet house. They took your name off the records, but I'll carve it back into their walls. I didn't know it yet, but by the next morning, the HOA would realize the storm they'd awakened, one sealed in that house long before I ever came home. The next morning broke sharp and clear, sunlight washing over Crestfield like nothing bad could ever happen here. Perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, painted fences, all pretending this place was pure. But I'd learned something about perfection. It's usually built on someone else's silence. The mansion stood behind me, bathed in soft light. For the first time in years, its windows reflected the sun again. I'd cleaned them myself the night before, one by one, like waking the house from a long coma. Inside, the box of proof waited under the dining table, my grandfather's papers, neatly stacked, ready for war. At 9 a.m., I drove straight to the HOA office. The meeting room was already full. 5 board members sat behind a long polished table, their nameplates gleaming. Margaret sat in the center, her suit perfectly pressed, her smile rehearsed. Mr. Harris, she said as I entered, you've been quite persistent. Just protecting what's mine. Her eyes flicked to the file in my hand. And that is? I laid it on the table and slid it toward her. The original deed. The notarized trust document. And about 6 decades of proof you pretended didn't exist. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting bright stripes across the table. Margaret flipped through the pages, her smile slowly fading, replaced by tight lips and furrowed brows. One board member leaned in to whisper, but she brushed him off. Finally, she said, these could be outdated. You can't just. They're not, I interrupted. I verified them at the county office. The clerk confirmed your transfer form was forged. I even have copies of your signature on it. A murmur swept through the room. Another member, an older man with gray hair and nervous eyes, cleared his throat. Margaret, if this is true, we could be in serious trouble. She shot him a glare that could slice steel. Then she turned back to me, that smile returning, thinner, colder. We can settle this quietly. Perhaps an offer. A payout. The HOA can compensate you for the land and... I laughed. Hard. You want to buy back something you stole? I leaned forward, voice low but sharp. You had your chance to be decent. Now it's mine. She exhaled, the mask slipping for a second. You don't understand how these things work. I do, I said. And by tomorrow, so will every homeowner in Crestfield. Her jaw clenched. Are you threatening me? No, I said, standing up. I'm promising you. I walked out before she could answer. Sunlight hit me full in the face as I stepped outside, warm, almost blinding, like the world was finally on my side. That afternoon, I spent hours scanning every document, uploading photos, and writing a detailed letter explaining the fraud, attaching every signature, every forged stamp, every proof. By sunset, I sent it to every homeowner in the community and CC'd the county legal department. By dawn, Crestfield wasn't quiet anymore. My phone buzzed non-stop, messages, calls, questions. Homeowners demanding answers. Board members resigning. And when I finally walked outside, the morning air was filled with whispers and anger. A few neighbors waved at me from across the street, tentative, curious, like they'd just realized who really owned the mansion. Then a black SUV pulled up in front of the house. Margaret stepped out. No clipboard this time, no sunglasses. Her face was pale, her composure cracked. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. I smiled, leaning against the porch rail. "You shouldn't have forged deeds." She looked around, the street filled with people watching, phones out, sunlight glaring off the SUV roof like a spotlight. For the first time, she had nowhere to hide. I didn't need to say another word. Because now, everyone knew. And the house that had been silent for years finally had a voice again. Morning came quietly, but not softly. The sunlight was sharp, pouring over Crestfield like a truth that refused to hide anymore. I stood on the front porch of my grandfather's mansion, no longer a ruin, not yet restored, but alive again. The boards creaked beneath my boots, and the scent of fresh paint drifted through the open door. For the first time, there were no HOA signs nailed to the gate. No warning notices fluttering in the wind. Only silence, the kind that comes after a storm. The past week had torn Crestfield apart. Emails had leaked. News spread faster than Margaret could lie. Homeowners demanded an emergency meeting. The county had already launched an investigation. And somewhere between the lawyers and the headlines, the truth came crawling into daylight. Margaret Delane, the woman who once threatened me with community regulations, had resigned. 2 board members were under legal review for document forgery. The HOA's name was now tangled in lawsuits and shame. And the deed, my family's deed, was officially restored. When I walked into the county office that morning to sign the final verification, the clerk smiled this time. "It's all yours again, Mr. Harris," she said, stamping the document. "Looks like justice found its way home." Those words stuck with me. Home. Not just a house, a legacy. A promise that had survived greed, silence, and time. By noon, sunlight poured through the mansion's clean windows. The old floors gleamed faintly under the dust I hadn't finished sweeping. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing against the walls, each creak like a heartbeat returning. In the living room, I found the photograph again, my grandfather, smiling beside the original gate. I wiped the dust from the glass and whispered, "We did it." The front door opened behind me. It was Mrs. Langley, one of the older residents. She'd lived next door since before the HOA formed. "I saw the news," she said, voice trembling but proud. "Your grandfather would have been proud too." "Maybe," I said softly. "I just wanted them to remember whose ground they were walking on." She smiled faintly. "They'll remember now." When she left, I stepped outside. The air was bright, fresh, unforgiving. Neighbors watched from driveways, murmuring, but this time it wasn't judgment, it was respect. At the edge of the property, Margaret's SUV appeared one last time. She got out slowly, holding a folder. Her eyes were tired, the kind that had finally run out of excuses. "I came to return this," she said, handing me the HOA's final withdrawal notice. "Lot 9 is officially exempt from Crestfield jurisdiction." I took it, reading the stamped seal. "My family's land, free again." "Why'd you really come?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Because I was wrong. About you. About all of it." Her voice cracked just enough to sound human. I didn't say anything for a moment. The sunlight reflected off the mansion windows, washing her face in harsh brightness. Finally, I said, "You weren't wrong about me." You just didn't think I'd fight. She nodded once, turned, and left without another word. I watched her drive away, the SUV shrinking down the road until it disappeared beyond the gates. Then I turned back toward the house. It stood tall, weathered but undefeated, its stone walls glowing under the white morning light. Every dent, every crack, every faded mark was proof of what it had survived, and so was I. I walked up the steps, ran my hand along the railing, and smiled. They had called it abandoned. They had tried to erase it. But all along, it was just waiting, for someone to come home. As the sunlight flooded the porch, I whispered one last time. This house doesn't belong to the HOA. It belongs to history. And somewhere inside those old walls, I swear I could feel my grandfather smiling back.